All right, morning. Hope everybody had a good break. Hope you didn't work too hard. So we're gonna do a couple things today. I'm gonna spend a few minutes I just want to go over a few items from the midterm, some of your feedback from the survey, as well as show you a sample solution from the practical section of the midterm. Okay. Then what we're going to do today, we're going to actually cover a couple topics because neither one of them really should take long enough that we need a full class. So we'll look at how to reuse our code within our site, and we're also going to look at how to handle errors when they happen, because they will happen. So we need to know, what do we do when things break in our PHP applications, okay? Just before I show a sample solution for the midterm practical, a couple things that came out of the feedback survey. Thank you for everybody who was very honest and candid and gave me some good suggestions in the feedback survey, which always helps me. So a couple of things I'm going to do. One is, people said watching the videos from last semester are really helpful, but it would be much better if I could just record our own classes. So I will do that. Okay, just as Tom is using the YouTube live stream, I'm going to do the same. So there is a COMP1006 playlist here on YouTube. So I will be putting in, you'll see COMP1006, lesson 8, part 1, Wednesday. That's our class. Okay, so all of the rest of our classes I will try to remember. And if at any point in the hour you happen to notice I haven't started the stream, then somebody stop me and tell me to start recording. Okay, so I will try to do that for each hour of class. One of the other pieces of feedback I got from several of you was asking for more practice, saying, I know I need to practice stuff with PHP and do extra stuff. I'm not quite sure where to go. So what could I do? So what I've put up on Blackboard, and this is entirely optional, in the assignments tab, I've created a non-graded, a folder here that says optional project. It's an application you can work on your own time. You can do it on your own. You can do it with somebody else. It's not for marks. It'll just give you a chance to do some additional practice with the stuff we're doing in class. Okay. So there's a description of the project here. Basically, this is an online time tracker. So imagine when you're done school or for co-op, you're going to work for yourself, but you're also going to maybe hire other people to do work for you, and you're going to build projects. So what you would need is some kind of online system for everybody to track all the time they're spending on the projects you're working on. Okay. So you would be able to, and I'll show you what this looks like, add, edit, delete clients, add, edit, delete projects, add, edit, delete timesheets, and then produce a log of all the timesheets. So this, you would want to do error handling, input validation, and your whole application should be private. It should be password protected, so not anybody can just find your website and start entering stuff in there. Okay, and we'll look at how to do that piece, the password protection, security authentication, in next week's class. So that's this first link, is the text document with the requirements. The second link is a set of screenshots. The very first time I actually hired a web student on co-op, this was her first project, was build an online time tracker for the company, which actually I'm still using. She built it, it was probably almost 10 years ago now. She built it. So I took screenshots of it. So here's, an add client page. And as you can imagine, there's a list page with edit and delete links. Adding a new project. So you would pick the client from a dropdown. Every project would belong to a client. Enter all this data. So at the end of the day, even now, I'm still using this application. Anytime I do billable work for a client, I click on the track hours link. I can select my client from the dropdown. I can select the project. I type in how many hours I've worked and a description of what I've done. So this way, at the end of each month or at the end of a project, what I would do was I would click on view hours, and the way I would pay anybody that works for me is I would select them from the list of users, and I'd put in a start date and an end date, and then I would get a list of, I was paying my co-op student by the hour. So she didn't log her hours here, she didn't get paid. And then if I was billing my clients by the hour, then I would take that, at the end of every month and charge them my hourly rate and send them an invoice. And I could actually send them this log as well. So they would know, okay, here's all the work that was being done on their project. And they could see the description here, all the days we worked, how many hours we worked each day, and what was being done every day. This is also a good way to help you learn how to quote accurately. If you're tracking your time on your projects, you can learn when you have projects in the future, okay, well, this is how much time I spent on project A. If project B is similar in size, I now have a good idea how many hours I'm going to need for estimating. So this is a handy application for you to have, and it's a good way for you to practice the stuff we're doing here in class. So again, you don't have to submit it to me. There's no deadline. There's no timeline. You can do as much or as little as you like, but this is a good way for you to practice. And if you're working on it and you need help, you can, of course, email me or come to office hours and I can help you with it. Okay. So that's in here inside of the assignments and optional project. Actually, I can show you. Here's the real thing. Looks exactly like what you saw in the screenshots. So I've got to log in. So any project that I've been working on, if I wanted to pay somebody, I could just look at, okay, for this month, let's see, it's the end of May 2008, maybe. So here were all the projects Alicia worked on and all the time she spent. And what I would do is, so I knew I had to pay her for that amount of time. And she also built it so I could dump this to an Excel file. So when I would print this off and email it to her, send it to her along with her paycheck. Or if this was my client, I could pick my client and do the same. So, I come to bill this client at the end of the month. Okay, well, here's all the time. I could send that off along with an invoice and they could see all the work we'd been doing for them. So the rest of this stuff will start to look familiar, add, edit, delete. Same kind of stuff we've been doing in class. You guys really have all the skills to be able to build this other than the security and authentication piece. So this is the kind of application I would expect now you could take what we've done in class and start to build out. The other comments I just want to address from the survey, many of you mentioned the pace of the class. And I got some comments saying the pace of the class is good. I'm following along, but we're constantly doing things and I'm not bored. Some people said you're going a bit too fast and I can't keep up. Some people said you're going a bit too slow and I wish we could speed it up. So I try to be sensitive to all of that. Obviously, it's a little hard to please everybody because everybody learns at a different pace. Okay, so if you made a comment and said, please slow down, and you're noticing I haven't drastically changed the pace, it's not because I've ignored what you've said, it's because I'm trying to balance that feedback with contrasting feedback that gave me other opinions about whether I'm going fast enough or slow enough. So when I get half the people saying too fast, or a third saying too fast, a third saying just right, and a third saying too slow, it tells me it's probably about right. It's about the best I can do. And of course, now you'll have all the classes on YouTube as well, so you can go and watch anything again that you've missed. I did want to give you a little demonstration. Priyank was nice enough to let me show his pages for the practical solution. So this is what they looked like. This is basically what I was looking for. So I wanted to see a drop down. Now I think you ran your insert script twice because it's got all the networks in here twice. Doesn't matter in particular. So the idea was I could click this. This drop down was being filled, and then I checked everybody's code. Believe it or not, I had one or two students who actually just typed in the names of the networks, I guess because they weren't quite sure how to do it. So the idea here was connect to the database, select the network names, run a query, store the results, and then loop through and create a set of option and end option tags. So if you did that and your page looks something like this, that was 5 of the 10 marks for getting this page working. So the idea was when I click the submit button, I would get a list, but this list would be filtered. So whatever I picked in the dropdown, I only got the shows for that network. Several people got this page working, but didn't quite figure out the where clause part, where you got, no matter what network I picked, I got all of the shows. So the idea is, again, I pick a different network, I get different results on my shows page that match. So how did we do this? So notice our select tag has a name. So Priyank used network name because it matched the column name in the database. Really doesn't matter what you called it. So on the shows page, the first thing we had to do was read what value was coming from the drop-down list. And we had to store that in a variable. Now, you chose to use get, which is fine. Many of you use post on your form. That was fine. If you use post on the form, we would need to use post here instead of get. Either one would work as long as it was consistent. So then we connected to the database. And the important part here was rather than selecting all the shows, we only wanted the shows for the network that the user picked in the dropdown. So we needed this where clause, and we needed to bind to fill our parameter here with our variable that comes from our dropdown. Running the query, building the table, well, most people were able to do that without too much trouble. Okay, so if people lost marks here, generally it was because this was the piece that was missing, the where clause and the bound parameter. Okay, so this was the result I was looking for. So there were 5 marks for each page, and if your page application, mini application worked something like this, you'd get full marks for it. Does anybody have any questions at all about the exam? Was it about what you expected, easier, harder, or pretty much what you expected? What you expected? I think the class average was around 70%, which is pretty normal. That's usually anywhere between sort of 65 and 75 is a fairly standard kind of average range on an exam. Now for your final exam, I haven't quite decided. The format will either be the same. It will be open book regardless. So I may give you some questions and then a practical section, or it may just be 3 hours all practical with no question and answer. I've yet to decide. We'll see about that. It will be open book in either case. Obviously, if it's all practical, you're gonna have to build more than 2 pages. You'll have to probably build 4 or 5 pages and build out a little bit bigger application with more functionality than what we did for the midterm. All right. So Priyank, thanks for letting me show that. Appreciate it. Get rid of that. Okay. So let's jump into lesson 8. We will also have a lab this week, which we'll look at a bit later. Okay. So by now, everybody should have a working copy of our beer store application. Okay. I put my code up on GitHub, and I think I put it in the lesson 6 folder. If you don't have it, I've also put the link in the lesson 8 folder. So if you need a copy, you can go here. You can download this as a zip file if you need to. Now, obviously, all of these files have my own database connection. So if they're going to work for you, you're going to have to change the database connection in these files. Right? If I go into one of them, we can actually look at my code online on GitHub. I'm just using my local server connection, so that's not going to work for you. You're going to have to put in and connect to your own database in all of these files. Now I want to go back to one of the very first things we did back in week 1 after I tried to learn some names. We took a look at some of these sites. I think we looked at the Globe and Mail, we looked at Facebook, We looked at Amazon, and I kind of scrolled from the top all the way down to the bottom. And the question I put out there was, what things on this page do we see that are going to be static, that are going to be the same on every page, and what things are going to change, what's going to be dynamic, right? So we had this conversation back 9 weeks ago. What elements here, if I click on any link and jump through the site, what things are going to be the same and what things are going to change?
Navigation will be the same.
Yep. Navigation for sure. The footer, right? This footer is identical. Basically, as soon as we get to here, as soon as we get to that black line, everything underneath it is going to be the same no matter what page we're on. Right. Anything else? So there's our footer, navigation. Yep, top banner seem to be the same. So all that stuff is the same. Anything else? Well, let's look here. So if I go in and click on one of these, right, we're seeing similar things. So we have basically a static header, static footer, and everything in between is dynamic, right? But this stuff is pretty much staying the same. And same here. We've got our header. And somewhere down here on the left, there's their little one column footer. And pretty much everything in between is dynamic. So one of the things we want to do is look at, in our little application that we've been building, we want the same thing. Pretty much every site we ever build, we know we're going to have one header and one footer, and those things are going to get shared. We may change a little of the content or the text or the visuals in the header and footer from page to page. We might not. Generally, we want to have those things one time. So usually our header is going to include what things would be standard? What would we expect to see in a header on any website, no matter what the site was for? Minimum of 2 things. Logo and the navigation at minimum, right? We might have other things like here they've got search and login. They'll show us weather. We may or may not have a banner. At pretty much any site we ever go to, we can expect we're going to have a logo and navigation at the top. What about in the footer? What do you expect we're going to see pretty much no matter what application we're looking at?
Contacts.
Could be contact information, copyright statement, could be social media links. They could be in the header or the footer. So we kind of expect, like, that's standard. So one of the things we need to do is look at in our application that we're building. Just get my server running. We can pull up our application from lesson 6. So we have this working application now, but we don't really have any kind of common header or footer. The only thing we're using for navigation is we have links here back and forth, right? We have an add link and we have a view link. So what we want to do is we want a common header, we want a logo, we want navigation, and we want a common footer. And we want all the pages on the site to share. This makes it easy for us to brand the site, let the user navigate around. So here's what we're going to do. Before we start into the code, like, this is where we're going with it. So what I'm going to do on my file system, just want you to go into wherever you're storing all your web pages, excuse me, for our class, in your COMP1006 folder. Open that up. Let's make a lesson 8 folder. If you have a working copy of your files from lesson 6, then let's copy these. So copy everything in lesson 6. So your scripts folder, all your beer pages. I have my README file from GitHub. If you don't have one, that doesn't matter. So I'm going to copy all of those pages. And I'll go to my lesson 8 folder. And we'll paste those in. We're not going to start, we'll work with these a little bit later. We're going to do a little demo with the header first with a few sample pages. So we'll try that first, and then we'll build a header and footer into our beer store application. So if you're taking my code from GitHub, just download it, extract it, and put it in a lesson 8 folder. So we'll leave these files here and we'll come back to them in a bit. So what we want to do is we need to look at how we can build out a separate header and footer and then connect them up to all of these pages. So if you go into your lesson 8 folder on Blackboard, there's a little, the third item here says, which PHP functions can we use to embed one page inside another? There are actually 4 different functions PHP has that would let us connect one file to another. They're all very similar, but there are some small differences between each one. So what I want you to do is give you about 5 minutes. I want you to look online, see if you can find the names of those 4 functions. And then explain, I want you to try and explain how each one is different from the other 3. We can use any of the 4, but the differences are minor. So take 5 minutes, try and answer those questions. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. We'll give you one more minute. All right, your time is up. What's one function somebody found that we can use for this?
Include.
Okay. So include is one of them. Yep.
Require.
Up. Anybody find the other two? Nope. Give you a hint. They're two different versions of the one. They're different versions of the ones we already have. There's two different include functions, and there are two different require functions.
Include once and require.
You got it, Peter. Include once and require once. So we can use any one of these. I'll save these notes on here. I'll save this item on Blackboard. We can use any one of these to link one file into another. What's the difference between include and require?
Will be a fatal error. Require can't find what it's trying to find.
Okay, and what about if include can't find it?
It'll throw an error, but it's not going to crash your one.
Right. Okay, so with include, execution continues if the included file isn't found. So let's say we're trying to link to a file called head.php, but we actually named our file header.php. So the file name we're linking to doesn't exist. If we use include, the rest of our page will still run. That file just isn't going to, the header just isn't going to show up. If we use require, this throws an error and stops execution if the required file isn't found. If there are questions and answers on the final exam, I guarantee this will be one of them. What's the difference between using include and require? What about the difference between using include and include once? You can probably deduce what this means. So with include, we can link the same file multiple times if we want in the same page. So let's say we have like a file upload page. So we've built as a separate file upload. So here's our, we have page 1. And over here we have upload.php. If we want to give our users the ability to upload multiple files. If we use include, we can only have this file linked in once. So if we use include, we can link this in as many times as we want. And it'll show up 3 separate times on the same page. We'll get 3 file upload boxes. So this would be include. If we say include once, we are only allowed to use this file in this page 1 time. Now, it's not very common that we do this. So in general, these differences aren't really that important. I think for those of you who have a textbook, you've looked in the textbook, typically they use require once, I think, in the examples in the textbook. So you can actually use any one of these. In here, I'm going to use require once. That's the one that tends to be used the most common. So include once, same as include, put the linked file included 1 time on each page. That would be the same for require.
So it prevents duplicates?
Yeah, so if you use include once, you can't, for example, and we'll try it, you couldn't put the header in your file twice. If you said include header.php, you could put that header in as many times as you want to. If you use include once, we'd get an error. It would show it once, and then when it found it again, it would throw an error. Say this file can only be included once. We'll try it. It's rare that we even try to include the same file more than once, so most of the time it doesn't make a difference which one of these functions we use. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to make 3 really simple pages first. So we're going to leave the BR pages out of it for now. What we want to make is we're going to make page1.php, page2.php, and head.php. And that head file will be shared by both page 1 and page 2. We'll do the world's simplest include file example. And once we know how to do that, then we'll add this to our beers page and flesh it out. So open up your code editor if you don't have it open already. I'm going to make a new PHP file and call it page 1. So on here, we'll just set up basic HTML tags. So just a basic HTML page with some text on it that says this is page 1. I also want you to make page2.php that's exactly the same as this. Just change the 2 places that say 1 to 2. So we'll have 2 files. And then we'll build the world's simplest navigation bar. So I'll copy everything and make page 2. That's exactly the same. I'll just change my title from page 1 to page 2. Change my content from page 1 to page 2. So when your pages are done, I want you to make a 3rd PHP file. Call it head.php. And inside of that file, instead of it saying this is page 1 or page 2, I want you to put in 2 links. Put in a link to page 1 and a link to page 2. So just put in two links, one link that goes to page 1, one link that goes to page 2. Now, connect to FileZilla if you're working on DreamHost. Let's upload your files to a lesson 8 folder on the server, and then we can test them out. And then we'll try and link them together. So far we've written 0 PHP code. This is all just straight HTML. So here's my page 1. Pretty fancy. Page 2. This is what the head looks like. Just have 2 links. That will take me to page 1 or page 2. So now what we want to do is we want this file, this shouldn't get loaded on its own. It should get loaded at the top of page 1, both page 1 and page 2. They're going to share it. So this way, if we want to make changes in our header, we want to add a logo, we want to change the links, we only have to open up this file and make changes here. We don't have the code being repeated on every page. So it's much more efficient. Question? No? Okay. So what would we do here? How would we get that header to appear at the top of both page 1 and page 2? Yeah, we can use any one. We could use include or require, or include ones or require ones. We can use any of them. So where should we put it? On what line do you think it would make sense to include or require our header? So you do it here after the body. Okay, let's try it here and see what happens. So let's use, well, Brianna, you suggested include. That's fine. We'll use include for now. And all we have to supply is the name of the file. And this is a PHP function, so it needs to be in PHP tags. Doesn't matter whether you write it on one line or over separate lines. So before we print out the body content, display the header, which will include our little navigation bar. We now will want to do the exact same thing on page 2. So before our body content, let's include head.php. So now we'll go back to our browser and see what happens. Okay, so now we've got our page 1 content with our navigation bar. Page 2, cool. That's pretty much all we need to do. Well, almost all we need to do. Looks good, but this is, as I said, this is the world's simplest navigation bar. Now I want to play around with it a bit. You don't have to change yours. Let's look at the difference. We're going to show you the difference between those 4 functions. Right? If I use require instead, we shouldn't notice any difference. Still works fine. But I'm going to show you the difference, what happens with include and require if the name of the file isn't found. So you don't have to change yours. So let's say my file is called head.php, but let's say I accidentally say I'm requiring header.php. So it's the wrong file name that I've used. When I use require, now my page stops. Notice my content didn't display. So it threw an error when it tried to find the header, and my content doesn't display. If I change this back to use include, notice my header doesn't show up because it's not found, but my page doesn't crash. The rest of my code executes and my content still shows up. So it's up to you whether you want to use include or require. It depends whether you feel the file that you're linking in is important. If that file is important, and usually it is, it's probably a good idea to use require and generate an error. Because your page might not make very much sense or work very well without that linked file. So I'll use, I kind of prefer to use require because I would rather get an error. If we wanted to use include, certainly not a problem. So I'll put it back, I'll fix it. So now if we want to make changes to our navigation, we can just go to head and we can change things here. Right? If I want to put on, let's say, just put on a line underneath. Well, that line is going to show up on both page 1 and page 2, any page in my site that uses the header. I've got a horizontal line here now. So we've made this a reusable section. If we add 500 pages to the site, we'll just use include or require. All 500 pages are going to share that header. So this is really pretty similar to what you've done when you create your CSS in a separate file, right? You don't repeat the CSS on every page. You want it right at once and keep it in its own file. So when we're building our applications, we need to be asking ourselves, what pieces of our site are going to be used on multiple pages? If what we're building is going to be used on different pages, we should put it in its own file and just include it or require it for efficiency. Now, there's one other thing we have to do here. This works properly. It looks fine in the browser, but it's not fine. Anybody have an idea what the problem is? Is that?
You're including the add section also and the doc type. So if you in the source code there's a add section, it dumps all the files, it doesn't care.
Yes, if there's one way to make Scott McCrindle angry, it's to generate HTML that looks like this, right? We have all of this stuff repeated, which we can't have, right? We still need to have a well-formatted document. So now we've got a couple of choices. We have to figure out, there's really no right and no wrong, but in my experience, one way I find works better than the other. We either have to leave this stuff in page 1 and page 2 and take it out of the head, or we have to leave it in the head and take it out of page 1 and page 2 so that those HTML code isn't repeated. What do you think would make sense? Would it make sense to take it out of the head, or should we take it out of page 1 and page 2 and leave it in the head? Okay, you would take it out of the head. How come?
If every page that you're including that has those requirements in there anyway, so you might as well try the HTML and include it.
Okay. Any other opinions?
Maybe we need to add something different. Let's say we are including our CSS in the head, and in some page we need to add another CSS, but we are including the add section with the header, so we cannot change it. So that's best practice, you know, add that to the every different page and just leave the header.
Okay, yep, that's one. Anybody think it would make sense to leave that stuff in the head? There is a big advantage to leaving it in the head and taking it out of the individual pages.
If you leave it in the head, you wouldn't have to link all the way, make all the ones.
Right, let's say you have a site with 100 pages, okay? All of those 100 pages are probably using one style sheet or the same set of style sheets. Do you want to have those links on 100 pages, or do you want to have them in the head? Personally, I want to have it in the head. I want to have it in the head. Now, Asat, the scenario you're pointing out is true. It's possible that one page may need custom CSS or something. That's true. In my experience, it's more likely that the stuff is going to get shared through the site, your scripts and head. So it's really up to you. I'm going to leave the stuff in my head, and I'm going to take this stuff out of my body. If you want to do it the other way around, that's fine. Whatever you think is best. There isn't an absolute right and wrong answer here. Okay? But we just know we can't have this stuff duplicated. And in fact, by putting it in the head, we are going to see there is going to be one little problem. Okay? Notice my page titles here. They say page 1 and page 2, which is good. Every page should have a descriptive title. If we take this stuff out, the title tag is going to be gone. Right? We'll try that. So I'm going to go to page 2. I'm going to take out everything above my require. So all of that HTML, that will now be supplied by my head file. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to do the same thing on page 1. My code editor is complaining it doesn't like that we've closed these tags because it doesn't know where the opening tags are. That's okay. We know the opening tags are in the head.php. So let's try it. So now I've got page 1 and page 2. Our HTML is cleaned up now. Whoops, almost cleaned up, not quite. But notice now this section is not duplicated, so that's good. Yeah. So what? So we need to. Where do we go to get rid of that? Which file should we be removing this from?
Should be the same one you removed from before.
Well, so we've got one copy of it here at the bottom. Yeah, so our head file still has those tags. So we want to remove, first of all, remove those from the head tag, because those things shouldn't appear at the top. They should appear at the very bottom. So first of all, let's remove those. So our head opens the body, it displays our nav, and it has this line. Then our page body starts. Okay, so now our HTML is clean. We have no duplication. We have a well-formed HTML document. The problem, though, is we now we've lost our page headers. So the browser is no longer indicating, and this can be important for search engines, no longer indicating what page we're on, which isn't a good idea. So how could we fix this? How could we make it so this value, instead of just saying head all the time, is going to say either page 1 or page 2? We can do it. If we do something on these pages before we call require, we could let the head know what value should go here. Oops. So on page 1, I'm going to move this down a couple lines. So link the header. How could we set a value of page 1 and make that value available to the header so that when we load page 1, this says page 1 here, and then do the same thing on page 2? We could use JavaScript. Yeah, we could do it with PHP.
Can we create a variable and we can use the variable without the page?
That's exactly what we're going to do. When we use require or include, whenever we have a variable, that variable is shared among all the pages. So we can set the page title. I'm going to create a variable called page title and give it a value of page 1. And I'm going to do this before we require our header. So first set up the variable and give it a value. Then let's link in our head file. So my variable is called, I called it $page_title. What do I have to do here so that that title shows up right where my cursor is flashing on line 4?
Change it to the variable.
Yeah, so we'll open PHP tags, and we'll also need an echo command. But Omar, you're right. We can now display that variable. So rather than our page title being hard-coded, it's now dynamic. So we're going to set the value of that variable, call our header, and when our header gets called, we're going to print out that variable. So the variable is shared between these two pages. So now when I click on page 1, I've got the proper page title. When I click on page 2, I'm getting an error because we have to set that variable on page 2 as well. So again, before we link the header, we use the same variable name. So this might be one way around the scenario you were describing, where we need to do some things on some pages and not others with the header. So it's important we do this first. If we call require first and set the variable after, when the header loads our So we've built the world's smallest navigation bar with PHP. But really, we can do whatever we want in the head. We can set up our meta tags. We can add our CSS links. We can style that header however we want. And now all the pages in our site are going to have it. Now, in this little example, we still have our closing tags down here, which is fine. It's correct. Later on with our beer store, not only do we want a header at the top, but just like the other sites we've looked at, we're going to want a footer at the bottom with some of the information we talked about. Contact information, copyright statement, etc. And we're going to want to share that at the bottom. So these tags will eventually get moved. So this way, every page, the only thing really on here is the specific content for that page or functionality for that page. Everything else is just in a reusable file which is linked in. So it makes it easier for us to maintain the site, also easier for us to update it. If we want to reskin the site, well, we can just really go ahead and change the CSS. We shouldn't have to change a lot of stuff in our individual pages. We may have to change some classes. But it makes it much more scalable and easy and more flexible, easier for us to maintain. So we should never have to write the same code and copy it from page to page. We're going to put it in its own file and link it in. It's going to save us a lot of time. Does anybody have any questions about what we've done so far with this little example? Anybody confused? Does it make sense what we've done so far? Okay, this is probably a good place for us to take a pause. So we'll take 10 minutes here. When we come back, we'll do this again, but we're going to kind of flesh it out a bit more, and we'll actually build the header and footer for our beer store site.